The very format that we know with section A, we know that it's going to comprise of 15 MCQ questions, 2 marks each, which gives me a total of 30 marks. Now let's get to the very first question in this particular section. So, which of the following statements correctly compares the traditional view of capital structure with the M&M theory without taxes? So this question is testing you on two of your concepts. You have to you have to remember the concept about your traditional theory, and then you have to compare it with the M&M theory without tax, and then let me know which of these statements is going to be true. So go through these statements on your own, take 2 minutes, and let me know your answers. Then we will discuss it together. Okay, I'm starting to receive answers. The very first one is here with me. Okay, I'm receiving multiple answers, and most of you are saying it's option A. Now, before I even think of my answer, I should quickly have a recap of these theories in my mind. What all have I studied? I've studied that as per the traditional view, it's not based on any theoretical backing, it does not have any theoretical foundation. So, it's also called as the intuitive approach. And what happens because of this theory is as you are increasing debt in your company, your cost of equity will rise initially slowly, then it will start to increase faster. You will get the benefit of cheaper debt until a particular level of gearing, but once you've reached and go towards the high levels of gearing, then ultimately your WACC is also going to increase. That means your WACC is going to be the least at a particular point of time, at a particular capital structure. That's the point at which the WACC will be minimal and the value of the company as a result will be the maximum. So that's what my traditional theory told me. And if I talk about M&M without tax theory, so here this theory basically came with the conclusion that it does not matter where my money is coming from, my WACC is going to remain the same. And then with tax theory told you to go for infinite debt, as much as debt as possible. So now if you go to the statements one by one, the very first statement tells you the traditional view states that an optimal capital structure exists that minimizes the WACC. So this is exactly what we've studied. We have one level where the WACC is minimum, whereas the M&M theory argues that WACC is going to remain constant regardless of the level of gearing. So this statement has to be correct because both parts of the statement are actually true. Both of the parts of the statement are telling me the concepts that I have learned as it is. Now let's talk about why the other three statements are not the correct answers. First one tells you traditional view claims that the firm value is independent of gearing. So this is not what we've studied. We've studied that WACC is going to decline. Ultimately, it's going to increase with higher levels of gearing. So there is one value where WACC is going to be lesser. So WACC does get affected with my capital structure. So I cannot say that the value of my firm will not affect my gearing. So the second statement is incorrect. Third statement tells me that the traditional view considers all increases in interest to be risk-free. Do we take this assumption in the traditional theory, guys? No. We take this assumption in the M&M theories. So this statement also has to be incorrect. Last statement tells me that the traditional view assumes perfect markets, while M&M theory assumes market imperfect imperfections such as taxes and transaction costs. So we have learned that when it comes towards the M&M theories, we have the assumptions. Definitely in the without tax theory, we have this assumption that we have no taxes in the economy, but with the with tax theory, that assumption gets relaxed, and we are also assuming a perfect economy in the M&M theory. That means there will be no transaction cost. So this statement is also incorrect. So all the remaining three statements are incorrect, which helps me further solidify my answer as option A. Are you all with me till here? Should we move to the second question now?
Ma'am, can you explain option D again?
Option D says that the traditional view assumes perfect capital markets, and further it tells me that the M&M theory assumes that there are market imperfections. Market imperfections means I will have taxes, I will have transaction costs. So why is this statement incorrect? Because when I'm talking about my M&M theory, I am having the assumption of perfect capital markets. That means I am assuming there will be no taxes. I am assuming there will be no transaction costs. But here this statement is wrong. Why? Because it's saying you that you are having market imperfections. But my assumption is that market is perfect. So it's the opposite of what is true. That is why, Akansha, this is not my answer.
Okay, ma'am, got it.
All right. All with me? Should we head to question number 2 now? Okay. So now taking you guys to the second question. Using the CAPM and ignoring taxation, what is the risk adjusted cost of equity for this new project? You have to give your answer to one decimal place. What has been told to you, Aurelia Company, an all equity finance business, is evaluating a potential project in a completely new line of activity. The company's current equity beta is 1.3. In the proposed business area, Harrow Company operates in the new business area with an equity beta of 1.5 and debt to equity ratio of 35%. The risk-free rate is 4% and the market risk premium is 5%. So you're given with all the information. This company is venturing into a new business area. So you have to find out what should be their new cost of equity, where you are adjusting for the fact that now company is taking a different level of risk. So take 2 minutes, do your workings, and let me know your answers in the chat box. Then we will discuss it together. All right, so I'm starting to receive some of the answers. You people are saying that it will be 8.9%. So let's also discuss this together. What all do I have to do? I have to follow the ungearing and the regearing process. Now, what am I going to venture into? I am venturing into the new area where I have been given the information about the proxy company. So what is my first step going to be? My first step is to ungear the equity beta of the proxy. So the proxy operates in the new business area, which has an equity beta of 1.5. Now the formula is also provided to me in the formula sheet. If I want to ungear and find out my asset beta, how can I do that? Asset beta will be equal to value of equity divided by value of equity plus value of debt into 1 minus t, and this whole fraction has to be multiplied with beta equity. So what I should do is I should find out how much will be the value of equity and how how much will be the value of debt. So they are telling me in the question that they have a debt to equity ratio. That means value of debt is, if my total capital is $100, then value of debt is 35, and the value of equity will be the difference between both of these numbers, 100 minus 35, that is 65 will be the value of equity. So for my calculations, I actually need value of debt into 1 minus tax. So what I will do is I will use my calculator. I am given with my value of debt as 35. So into 1 minus the tax rate must be given to us. So if it is not given to us, then we will ignore the taxation impact. So that means I do not need to calculate VD into 1 minus T. So I will use these numbers as it is. Now, what exactly do I have to do? The same formula as I have seen in the formula sheet. What was the formula? I have to take value of equity in the numerator divided by the total of value of equity and plus the debt part. So I will take 1.5, which is my equity beta that has been given to me. So if I clear this out, this is 1.5 of equity beta. This needs to be multiplied with the value of my equity. My value of equity is 65 divided by the total amount of money that I have is 65 plus 35, that is 100. So this is what my asset beta is going to work out to. Now, ideally, what is our next step according to the steps that we have learned as per the concepts? What is the next step as per the concepts when we were covering the lectures, guys?
Regear.
We have to re-gear. But do we have to do this in this question also? Why not? Give reason. Why do we not have to regear? Yes, absolutely right. This company is solely having equity. That means they will only have a business risk which they will face, and they will not be facing any of the financial risk. So their equity beta will be the same as the asset beta. So what I will do is now I will use this as the beta for my CAPM formula. I'm given the risk-free rate is 4%. So 4% plus the beta into the premium of 5%. So I'll calculate first the later part of my formula. So 0.05 I have multiplied so that I get my second half of the formula of CAPM. What is exactly the formula of CAPM that I have studied? I have to take the risk-free rate plus beta into the premium. So premium is given to me as 5% and beta I have just calculated as 0.975. So this is the second half of my formula, plus I have to add the risk-free rate. So the risk-free rate is given to me as 0.04. Right, so I add all of these numbers together, convert this into percentage, and you will get 8.875. So the closest is going to be option B. All clear, guys? Should we move to the third one? Others? Were you people able to calculate?
Ma'am,
Yes, Ritika.
ma'am, we will use beta asset in the CAPM formula.
Yes, because this company is all equity financed. हमने दो तरीके के रिस्क पढ़े हैं,
Yes.
business risk
Business.
and financial risk. Business
Yes.
risk represents because of the nature of the business. Financial risk is because I have debt. So as a company, Ritika, if all the money that you have is from equity, then do you face financial risk?
No.
No, you only face the business risk. Which beta measures only the business risk?
Beta asset.
Beta asset. So can I say that for a company where financial risk is zero, we have studied this in the concepts also, that whenever the financial risk will be zero, beta asset will be equal to beta equity.
Yes.
So that is why we are considering that beta equity will also be the same, because in the CAPM formula, we have to take beta equity only.
Okay.
Right. So here in this case, it is the same. If the company was not all equity financed, if they had some debt also, then we will use the re-gearing step as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? Okay. Now let's move forward towards the third question. So here is question number 3 in front of you. The following are the extracts from the financial statements of Simply Company. Revenue is given, cost of sales given, inventories, trade receivables, and trade payables. Purchases for the year totaled $1,251 million. You people have to assume that there are 360 days in 1 year. You have to calculate Simply Company's inventory holding period, trade receivables collection period, and trade payables payment period, and all calculations you have to do in the nearest days. So what you are going to directly use the formula. How do I calculate the inventory holding period? What's the formula that I have learned for that, guys?
Average
Inventory
inventory
cost of sales.
Yes.
on my cost of sales into 360.
Right, absolutely. So inventory figure is directly given to me as 345. Then my denominator has to be the cost of sales, which is also directly given to me. So I can very easily do this calculation over my calculator. What I will do is I will say that my inventories are worth 345 versus my cost of sales is 2150. And when I multiply this with 360, I'll be able to get my answer in terms of days. So which number will you say to the nearest day?
58.
58. So I will drag and drop 58 to the inventory holding days. Are you all with me on the calculation of inventory holding days? Everybody, very simple. Okay, now let's come towards the receivables collection period. Again, what is the formula that you have learned for receivables collection?
Trade receivables upon sales into 360 days.
Trade receivables upon the total sales, or is there any change in the?
Credit.
Yes, you
Credit.
Credit
only take the
sales.
credit sales. Very good. So we are being told that from my trade receivables, $455 million I have worth of trade receivables, and 85% of my sales are on credit. That means if this is my total sales, how much of this will be credit sales? 85% of this will be credit sales. So how will I do my workings? I will first find out how much is 85% of my credit sales. So 0.85 into 3560, this is my denominator, 3026. Numerator has to be receivable. So 455 divided by 3026, and this number multiplied by 360. This is going to give me 54.13 days. So what is the nearest number? What should I drag and drop?
54.
54. So I'll pick up 54 and drop it over here. Same way I can calculate my payables also. Can you tell me what's the payables formula?
Payables upon purchase into days.
Payables upon purchases into days. So how purchases are again given to us 1251. So everything is straight away given. How much of payables do I have? 220 divided by 1251, and this whole figure will be multiplied with 360. So this way, which number will you drag and drop from here?
63.
63 is the closest, so I will put this over here. This is how we will do the workings. I think this was very simple. Examiner has gifted you people 2 marks. Simple use of the formula, nothing else. All good, guys? Should I take you to the next one? Okay. So now let's head to question number 4. Which of the following statements is or are true? So go through the statements one by one, check which ones do you people think are correct and which is not, and then we will discuss it together with reasons. Okay, I am receiving your answers. You people are all saying that it will be option A. Let's discuss the statements one by one. If you're saying option A, that means you people are saying that only the first statement is correct, and you people are right about that. Let's discuss the statements one by one. First statement tells me that if I want to calculate my sensitivity of NPV to change in sales volume, I can find out using NPV divided by the PV of all of the future sales contribution. So this is exactly what we've learned. Whenever I want to find sensitivity towards volume, I will take contribution. And whenever I want to calculate the sensitivity towards revenue, what do I consider then? When I want to consider the sensitivity towards a change in the revenue, what do I consider then? Or the change in selling price rather, then I consider my revenue, right? In case the question can give you two things, either your sensitivity you want to measure in terms of volume, so for volume you will use contribution, and in case they ask you to calculate the sensitivity of the selling price, then you people will be using the revenue. So this statement is absolutely right. This is exactly what we have studied. Now let's talk about why 2 and 3 are incorrect. Statement 2 tells you that the problem with the risk and uncertainty in investment appraisal is that neither can be quantified or measured. Would anyone of you want to give me a reason why this statement is not correct? Yes, Anya, go ahead.
It's because risk is always quantified. We can put it into a number, but uncertainty cannot be quantified or measured.
Yes, and the statement is saying that both of them cannot be quantified, so it's wrong. Risk can be measured, uncertainty cannot be measured. Absolutely right, Anya. Absolutely right, Rahul. Now, moving towards the third statement, the lower the sensitivity margin, the lesser critical the variable will be to the NPV decision. Why do you think this one is wrong?
More critical.
Yes, the greater will be the sensitivity. Lower the percentage, greater will be the sensitivity. What do we mean by that? Even a small change in the variable is going to give you a different decision for the project. That means your NPV, which is right now positive, will turn out to be negative in case the number changes by a very small percentage. So smaller the percentage, more critical, more important will be the variable to your decision. So statement 3 is opposite of what it should say. That is why it is incorrect. So only the first statement has to be marked right over here. Are you all with me? All three statements understood with reason, guys? Okay, let's now head towards the fifth question. Which of the following is an illustration of the principal agent problem? So read through the options one by one and let me know where do you see a principal agent issue that is happening. Okay, I'm starting to receive your answers, and most of you are saying that it will be option B. That's the right answer, also. Let's discuss the statements one by one. Basically, whenever I want to talk about a principal agent relationship, it will mean that one person is the real owner and agent will be the one who is doing the work on the behalf of the owner will pay maybe a fixed salary or a fixed commission to the agent, and agent will have to do the work not for himself but on the behalf of the principal. So the very first statement, if you guys see, it says supplier cutting their costs by using cheaper materials to keep their prices low. So do you think there's any principal agent involved here in first MCQ, the first option? No, there's no relationship. Second statement tells you managers avoiding debt finance because lower interest payments avoid the need for careful cash management. So what exactly is happening over here? If you imagine in under this scenario, the managers, the directors, they are basically the employees of the company, and who are they working for? They are working for the shareholders of the company. So if they are avoiding debt, what does that mean? If they are avoiding debt just because they do not have to do carefully management of the cash, then that means if the business is not taking any debt, that means they are not acting in the best interest of the shareholders. Why? Because taking little bit of debt is actually beneficial for the shareholders. So if they are deliberately not doing something which will benefit the shareholders, just because they might have to be troubled a little bit more because they will have to keep up with the debt payments, the interest payments, and the principal repayment, that is why if they are avoiding that, so basically they are putting their own comfort, they are putting their own interest above the needs, the objectives of the shareholders. That is why we will say that principal agent relationship exists over here. What about the other options? Shareholders group who are disagreeing over the dividend policy. So shareholders, if they're discussing within themselves, then they are only themselves discussing. Here agent has no role to play. And then the last one, the stock market exerting pressure on companies to achieve short-term profits. So here also it's not that the real owner is somebody else, company is somebody else. Stock market as a whole is a separate entity. There is no principal agent relationship which exists between the stock market and the company which is listed on the stock market. So it will only be option B, which is my right relevant answer. All clear, all four statements, guys? Please let me know if you have any doubts. Okay. Now let's move towards the sixth question. So you have to tell what is the equivalent annual cost of using the machine if it were bought and replaced every 4 years in perpetuity. So every 4 years till the end of time, I will keep on repeating the same project, buying the same machinery. So I have to tell what will be the EAC of it. A machine costing $225,000 has a useful life of 4 years, at the end of which its estimated net present value of the resale will be 15,300. The present value of the total running cost over the next 4 years is 55,567. So already they have calculated the present values and given to me. That means I do not have to separately calculate the present values on my own. I can simply take on these numbers. Initially, I will purchase these machines for $225,000. So that means $225,000 are going to go away from my pocket. So minus $225,000. Then because of this machinery, I'll also have to incur some running costs. So running costs also, if I incur over all of these years, I will be incurring 55,567. So far this much negative. And in the last year, I am going to receive the resale value. When I sell the machine, I will get the resale value. That's also given to me in the present value terms. So this represents cash coming in. How much cash will come in? 15,300. So this is the net effect. This is the negative balance. This is the operating cost which will be there in total. Now I have to find out the equivalent annual cost. That means, is this my final step yet? Is this my final step yet, guys? No. What do I have to do? Yes, I have to divide it by the annuity factor. So what I will do is, my cost of capital is 10%. I will open my formula sheet. I'll go to the annuity tables. 10% for a period of 4 years. So the factor is 3.170. So I will divide this with 3.170, which is going to give me 83,680.44. So I have to give my answer to the nearest dollars. So I will say $83,680. Any doubts in any of the steps, or are we good? Should I move to the next one? Okay. So moving ahead to question number 7. If the share issue is completed and the bank loan is redeemed, what will be the company's new EPS, new earnings per share we are supposed to calculate? So Marlowe company has 75 million shares, ordinary shares outstanding, and has reported a net after tax profit of $35 million. The company proposes to issue 25 million additional ordinary shares at $1.2 each and to use all the proceeds to repay an existing bank loan which carries an interest at 5% per annum. You have to assume that the operating profit, that means the PBIT, will remain unchanged and that the corporation tax is charged at the rate of 25%. So take 2 minutes, those of you who haven't already solved this one, then we will discuss it together. I already have one answer from Anya. That's great. Okay, great. So you people are coming up with your answers. Let's also discuss this together. Now, what we have to do is I have to find out the new EPS for the company. So I know that what's the formula of EPS? I have to find out my new total profit. And if I divide that by the total number of shares, I will be able to calculate my EPS. So what do I do? Let's first work around to calculate my numerator. So my numerator, I have to take the earnings. So earnings after tax, after interest, I have to consider. So they are telling me in the question that I have reported a net profit of $35 million in the last year. And what I'm doing is with the new money that the company is raising, I will use this money to repay the bank loan. So that means if I want to find out how much my earlier operating profit would have been, what is the way that we calculate the operating profit for any company? I start off first with my sales. From my sales, I subtract my variable cost. So then I get my contribution. From my contribution, I subtract my fixed cost. After that, I am left with my PBIT, that's operating profit. From this, I subtract the interest and then I am left with PBT. And from this, I subtract taxes. Then I am left with PAT. That is my profit after tax. So the question is telling me that in the new year for which I have to calculate the EPS, the operating profit, the PBIT, is going to remain exactly the same. So that means how much will my new earnings be? I have to do my reverse working because I know that the PBIT is going to remain the same. What line did it tell you? That you have to assume that operating profit, that is PBIT, will be the same. So if right now, guys, my profit after tax is 35 million, in this particular economy where I'm living, I pay taxes worth 25%. So that means whatever would have been my PBIT, let's suppose my PBT, if my PBT was X, then how much tax would I have paid? I would have paid a 25% tax over X. So that means X minus 25% X is equal to 35. So can you let me know how much will be the value of X? How much would be the value of X? Yes, 35 into 100 divided by 75. So calculate and let me know how much does it work out to? X minus 25% of X will give me 75% of X. So X is equal to 35 into 100 divided by 75. That gives me my profit before tax would have been 46.67. You can even reverse check your workings. If you calculate 25% of it, it will come out to 11.67. And when you do your workings to verify whether it comes to 35 or not, so you take 46.67 from this takeaway 11.67. So you can see it's exactly coming out to 35. This way you can quickly verify your answers also. Are you all with me till the calculation of PBT? Any queries still here? Okay, now what we will do, we will consider how much the interest will be. So to find out how much my interest would have been, I need to know how much of debt will I have, multiply that by the interest rate. So interest rate is given to me, but the value of debt is not told. Indirectly, the value is told that I am proposing to issue 25 million shares, which I will be selling at 1.2, and all the proceeds will go away to pay the existing bank loan. That means how much of a loan do I have? 25 multiplied by 1.2. That means I had a loan of $30 million on my head. So $30 million over this figure, I would have paid an interest of 5%. So into 0.5% of this, that is 1.5 million of interest that you would have paid. So here 1.5 million would have been subtracted. So x minus 1.5 will be equal to 46.67. That means x will be 46.67 plus 1.5 number. So 46.67 plus 1.5. That means this number would have been my PBIT in the current year. This is what I have earned, and it's been told to me that this will remain the same for the next years also. So this is something which is my PBIT. Now guys, in the current year, when I am calculating my new EPS, what will happen? I have completed the share issue and the bank loan is redeemed. So once I have redeemed my bank loan, do I still have to pay any interest? This is my PBIT. I want to go towards PAT. So interest cost is 0 because now I have repaid my loan. So if interest is 0, then this same number becomes my PBT, profit before tax. Now what will happen? How much money will be left for the shareholders? What should I do the next step?
मैम एक बार लास्ट लाइन रिपीट करना.
Are you clear with this figure of 48.17?
Yeah. After that you have given this statement कि हमने वो इंटरेस्ट लोन पे कर दिया.
ठीक
एक
है,
बार
तो
वो
आपको बताया गया है रितिका कि जो भी कंपनी ने नए पैसे रेज करे, वॉट एवर न्यू मनी दैट द बिजनेस ब्रॉट इन, दैट वाज यूज्ड टू पे all the proceeds were used to repay the existing bank loan. That means whatever debt the company had, whatever bank loan the company had, that debt is paid off. That is what we mean by this line. Yes or no? So if you do not have any debt, then do you charge any interest in this year's profit? No. So interest is 0. That means PBIT minus 0 interest is equal to my PBT. So PBIT is equal to PBT. So 48.17 is my profit before tax also. Then what is the next thing that we do? I had shown you people the performer. Once we are done charging the interest, we come to PBT, and on PBT we charge the taxes. So on this number of 48.17, now how much tax is being levied by the government? We were given that the tax rate is 25%. That means when I subtract 25% of it, I will be left with 75%. So this is going to be into 0.75. This is going to be the money which will remain with the company for the shareholders. So this is my PAT, which I will use as the numerator of my EPS working. Are you all with me till the numerator calculation? Okay, now what do we take for denominator? For denominator, I want the total number of shares. Can anyone tell me how much total number of shares will be there after this new equity that I have issued? 75 I already have, and now 25 more I have done. So that means a total of 100 million is there with me. So what I will do is I will divide the total profits of the company with the total number of shares, that's 100 million. So that gives me 0.3 361, which is going to give option C as my answer. Any doubts in any of the steps, please let me know, guys. All with me till here?
मैम मुझे क्लास क्वेश्चन में डाउट है, अभी ईएसी वाला जो किया था।
Okay. Is this one understood by everybody? Then I'll go back. Rahul, Anya, Kansha, all clear? Yashika? ठीक है. So now, yes, Ritika, what doubt do you have here?
मैम ये वाली स्टेटमेंट लिखी एवरी 4 इयर्स इन परपेचुटी, मैंने इस क्वेश्चन में क्या किया था, जो ये प्रेजेंट वैल्यू है इनको प्लस माइनस करके जो कॉस्ट आ रही थी इन परपेचुटी था ना, तो मैंने अपॉन में 10% से डिवाइड कर दिया इसको।
नहीं रितिका, हम कॉन्सेप्ट क्या पढ़ते हैं, ईएसी का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है ये कहता है कि जो भी हमारा प्रोजेक्ट है हम उसी को रिपीट करते रहेंगे परपेचुटी में। तो यहाँ पे मेरा क्या प्रोजेक्ट है कि मैं एवरी 4 इयर्स रिप्लेस करूंगी अपनी मशीन। तो मतलब ये 4 ईयर वाली जो रिप्लेसमेंट साइकिल है ये मैं बार बार यूज करती रहूंगी। परपेचुटी का यहाँ पे ये मतलब है, इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि मैं परपेचुटी बाद मशीन बदलूंगी।
ठीक है, ओके।
यस। All right. Now moving forward towards the 8th question. Which three of the following are the main macroeconomic policy objectives? Again, very simple question from chapter 2. Easy marks of the paper. This is what I call it. Read through the options, think and let me know. Okay, right. Most of you are saying option A, that is 1, 2, and 3, and you people are absolutely right. When we were studying chapter number 2, we found out what are the major things that the government wants to achieve with the policy that they make for the whole economy. So we've studied low and stable inflation is what they want. They want that the economy should grow. They want full employment. But if you talk about exchange rate fixed, this is not what the governments around the world want. Some governments will follow a floating rate, some governments will follow a fixed rate. So fourth is not really necessary. And fifth is having a balanced budget. Sometimes when the government wants to take care of the inflation, they will have a deficit budget. Somewhere they will have a surplus budget. And some places when the government wants the economy to spend more amount of money, they want to boost the demand, then they are going to spend more in the economy, they are going to collect lesser taxes. So then the government is going to be in a deficit. So it's not necessary that the budget will always be balanced. So which three will be the macroeconomic objectives? It will be the first three statements. All clear? Very easy this one. Should we head to the next one? Okay, so now let's move towards the question number 9. Which of the following statements are correct in relation to Islamic finance? Biha is a listed company, seeking new sources of finance to fund a long-term investment project. The directors have been advised that Islamic finance is alternative source to conventional finance. So you have to read through the statements. First one says Mudaraba is a form of equity finance where profits are shared according to a pre-agreed contract and losses are solely borne by the capital provider. Second statement says that Musharaka is a form of equity finance in which the investment partners receive dividends and losses are shared according to capital contribution. Third is that Sukuk cannot bear interest. The Sukuk holder's return for providing the finance is a share of the income which is generated by the bonds. And the last one says Islamic instruments by their true nature means that they are not traded through a secondary market. So which option do you people think will be relevant here? What statements are correct? What statements are incorrect? Read through the statements properly and let me know. I'm waiting for more answers, then we will discuss it together, guys. Okay, most of you are saying option C, and that's absolutely right. So, option C says 1 and 3 are correct. Now, let's understand the reason one by one why we are saying that 1 and 3 are correct and 2 and 4 are incorrect. So, first statement, Mudaraba, this is exactly what we've studied as the concept. This is a substitute for equity wherein profits will be shared as per the ratio which has been agreed and losses will be attributable only to the provider of the capital. So, one has to be one of my right answers. This is the exact core concept behind the same. Second is Musharaka is a form of equity finance where partners will receive dividends. Guys, is there any source of finance in Islamic finance where dividends will be paid? Have you studied any Islamic finance instrument where dividends were being paid? No. So statement 2 is incorrect because it says dividends will be paid. Third one is sukuk cannot bear interest. This is absolutely right. We are studying that as per the principles of Islamic finance, interest charging is not allowed. Interest is considered as haram in Islam. So that means they cannot charge interest. They cannot pay interest over the sukuk. What do? Whoever they are borrowing this money from, whatever income that they generate using these bonds, they give them a part of that particular income. So it's not directly termed as interest. So this is exactly what this statement is saying. Hence, it is the right answer. Now, moving towards the fourth statement, Islamic instruments mean that they cannot be traded on the secondary market. If you are following all the rules and regulations as per the Sharia law, the law which governs Muslims all around the world, you get to know that anything which is complying with the Sharia law, that can be traded over the secondary markets. So it's also not necessary. That's why the fourth statement also has to be eliminated. Option 1 and 3 are my right answers over here. All good, guys? Understood this one? Okay. Let's head towards the question number 10 now. The very first, okay, let's go through the requirement first. Which of the following actions will best reflect the principle of value for money in an organization? So read through the options carefully. You have to tell me which of them will reflect value for money. Very easy, this one. I'm waiting for your answers. Yes, absolutely right, guys. The chat box is flooded with D. That is option 1 and 4. You people are absolutely right. Why? Because if you read through the statements one by one, we have learned 3 E's with respect to value for money model. One is economy. Economy is all about minimizing the input cost. Then the second E that I have is efficiency. What is efficiency? That I have to maximize my output to input ratio. And the third E is effectiveness. That is my final objective. So if I talk about this first statement, procuring goods and services at the most economical cost. So you people are saying that this is representative of value for money. Can you tell me which E does it pertain to out of the 3 E's? Procuring goods and materials at economic costs? Yes, absolutely. This is economy. Very good. So this has to be one of my answers. Second is launching promotional activities to boost my brand image. Is this part of any E's that we have studied as far as the value for money model is concerned? No, it's neither economy nor efficiency. not effectiveness. So all three are not. So that means second has to be eliminated. Third says increasing the profit distributed to shareholders. Again, this is neither of the three E's, so has to be eliminated. Last one says optimizing the use of available resources so that I achieve the best output. Can you tell me which E does this represent? Utilizing your inputs correctly so that you can have maximum output. Yes, absolutely bang on, guys. This is efficiency. So my answer here has to be 1 and 4. Okay, are you all with me? All statements understood with reasons? Why they are correct, why they are incorrect? Great. Now we move towards the question number 11. A company has just paid a dividend of 25 cents per share. It is expected to pay a dividend of 0.265 in 1 year's time. The company's cost of equity is 15%. I have to tell that what is the ex-dividend market price of the share. Very easy question. Take 2 minutes, solve and let me know your answers. Anya, if you're getting your answer as 0.294, then you're making some mistake. Yes, 2.94 is the right answer, no problem. So what we have to do is we have to find out the market price of the share, and the information is given to me as far as the growth model of dividend is concerned. Even if you people do not remember the formula, here the formulae are given. Market value is asked. In my numerator, I want to take the dividend of the next year. Denominator, I want to take cost of equity minus my dividend growth rate. So what I have to do is I will first need to do my calculation of the growth rate. How can I do that? Initially my dividend was 0.25. Now it is rising to 0.265. How much is the change? 0.265 minus 0.25. So this is the change divided by my original dividend of 0.25. That means how much growth has been visible? 6% growth has been visible in my dividends. Now I have everything that I need for my formula. My formula is dividend of the next year. Dividend of next year is given 0.265 divided by, I have to take the cost of equity minus the growth rate. Cost of equity is 15%. 15 minus, just now I had calculated the growth rate was 6%. So 15 minus 6 will give me 9% as the denominator. So I'll divide this with 0.09 and 2.94 is what I will get over here. Any doubts in any of the steps? Are we good to proceed further, guys? Okay, so this is question 11 that we have finished. Now let's move towards question number 12. Assuming 360 days in a year, what would be the yearly reduction in finance cost if the management shortens the collection period by 30 days? So Maple Company has annual credit sales. The annual credit sales of Maple Company are given to us as $12 million. Accounts receivable of $3 million. Working capital is financed through bank overdraft at an annual rate of 10%, and the company's cost of capital is 12%. So you have to tell what will be the reduction in the finance cost. How much money will I save because of finance related cost due to shortening my collection period by 30 days. So whatever is my period right now, I will reduce that period by 30 days. So right now if it is 70 minus 30, that means now it will become 40. So take 2 minutes, do your workings and let me know your answers. Then we discuss it together. I've already received 2 answers in the chat box. I'll wait for 1 more minute, then we discuss this together. Okay, I'm receiving your responses. Most of you are saying it will be $100,000. Let's also discuss this together, how you will solve this question. So what is happening? Question is asking me if I reduce my days by 30, then how much will be the saving in my finance cost? So what I do is for this calculation, I will first need how many days am I receiving the payment right now, the current scenario. So as far as the current scenario is concerned, how do I calculate the number of days? I know the formula is receivables divided by credit sales into the number of days that are there in the year, which is given as 360. So 3 divided by 3 is my receivables divided by my credit sales of 12. Multiply this with 360. So that gives me, currently I take 90 days to collect the payment from my customers. So if I calculate how much would be my finance cost right now, how many are my receivables given to me? Receivables are $3 million. So over $3 million, right now, I am paying a 10% interest. So if you take 10% of this figure, you will get 300,000. This is the amount of interest that you people are paying right now. Now, if the collection period reduces by 30 days, so right now I had calculated that it is 90 days. If it reduces by 30 days, then the new days will become 60 days. So if the new days are 60 days now, so I will now need my new receivables figure. So how can I calculate my new receivables? I will simply transpose the formula. What is the formula that I have learned? That receivable days will be equal to receivables divided by the credit sales into 360. So when I'm inversing the formula, what will I do? I will take 60 divided by 360, and if I multiply this with my total sales, then I will be able to get to my receivables. So total sales are 12 million. That means my receivables right now are 0.1167. It was 60 divided by 360 is my new number of days, multiplied by 300 and multiplied by my sales figure of 12 million, which is going to give me $2 million. Now, how much interest will I pay on $2 million of receivables? 2 million into 10%. Earlier, I used to pay 300,000. Now I am paying 200,000. So how much am I saving? I am saving $100,000. So option B has to be the right answer over here. All with me? Any doubts in any of the steps? Please let me know, guys. Okay. So let's move forward towards the question number 13. Which of the following are features of an over-the-counter interest rate option? So 4 features have been given. The terms of the contract can be customized. Contract is settled through a central clearing house. Buyer pays upfront premium. Option provides protection against adverse movement. So find out which of them we should be selecting as the features. Put your answers in the chat box. Okay, I'm starting to receive answers. I'll wait for a few more, then we discuss this together, guys. Okay, very good. So you people are saying that it will be option A. That's absolutely right. Let's discuss the statements one by one. The very first statement says that terms of contract can be customized to the needs of the buyer. That's absolutely right, because for OTC, we also say that these are customizable, these are tailor-made, these are specially made for you. So they will be tailored to your requirements. So we can customize it as per what we want. Then the second says we have to settle it via a clearing house. OTC, guys, is it ever settled via a clearing house? Is there any middle party that's involved in OTC options? No, it's a direct deal between the bank and the person who is dealing with the bank. So it's not necessary that rather it's not going to be there that you have any intermediary. Forget about having a central clearing exchange house. For which sort of instruments can you say we have clearing houses or we have exchange regulated? We have exchange traded options. Yes, futures. Forward, no, Ritika. Forwards are a part of OTC. Forward, how I remember, how you people can also remember this way is forward में O आता है. तो O is OTC. Right? So second statement basically has to be eliminated. Third statement says that the buyer will pay an upfront premium. We have learned this as the very concept. Even if you exercise the option or not, it does not matter. Whenever you are buying any option, you have to pay the premium then and there. And then you have the last statement. The option provides protection against the adverse movements in the interest rate. So that's exactly what happens whenever, let's suppose, things are not going in the favor, then you can go ahead and utilize your option. And in case the market goes in your favor and option is against your favor, then you simply have the choice not to enter into the option related transaction. So that means even if you have paid the premium, it does not matter. You are not obligated, it's not compulsory for you that you have to enter into that transaction. If you want to, you can. Even if you don't want to, then it's just that premium will be non-refundable, but nothing else will be done. No legal action will be taken that you did not fulfill your contract, which is not the case in the concept of futures. So the fourth statement also is going to be correct. That means 1, 2, and 1, 3, and 4. All these three statements are correct. Only second is incorrect because it says that there is an intermediary, but in OTC it's simply one party talking to the other party. There are no counterparties. There are no third people involved over here. Are you all with me? All statements are understood? Okay. Now let's move towards the 14th question. Which of the following best describes this policy? A company is reviewing its working capital financing policy. Guys, we've studied two kinds of strategies. One is the working capital investment policy. So, how much of investment do you do? Do you do too much of investment in working capital? Do you do too less of investment? Or do you balance it? All of these are called as the investment strategies. Then, if you talk about the financing strategy, this is basically where the money is coming from. So conservative, aggressive, and matching. Now what is happening over here is this company wants to minimize the finance cost even if it means taking higher liquidity risk. So which one do you people think we will select here? Yes, if you are wanting to minimize your costs and you are ready to take a huge amount of risk, you're absolutely right, Anya. I will be called as an aggressive person. What would an aggressive person want to do? Aggressive person will say, I do not mind taking any risk, but I want to get good profits. How can you get good profits when your costs are lesser? So whenever you have two choices, where should I get my money from? Should it come from long-term sources? Should it come from short-term sources? So then what does your mind tell you? You want to earn more money, right? So do one thing, go more for short-term finance because it is cheaper compared to the long-term finance. So the very first statement, if you see, it says it uses short-term finance to fund both fluctuating as well as part of non-current assets. That's exactly what happens. For fluctuating, I will definitely use the short term, but when it comes to permanent, because I'm an aggressive person, even some part of the permanent assets also I will finance using short term. Second statement says it matches. So this is not the matching policy that we're talking about, hence incorrect. Third says that it uses long term finance. Whenever I want to minimize the cost, I will never use long term finance. So third statement is incorrect. And if I talk about the fourth one, it holds high levels of cash and inventory, mainly financed by long term sources. So what do you think? Is the financing strategy anything related to whether I'm having high level of cash or inventory? No, that will come as part of the investment policy. So fourth statement also has to be incorrect. First one is indeed my final answer. Understood this one? Very easy, guys. Okay. Now let's move forward towards the very last question of section A. What type of exchange rate risk would Aperol company experience with the $100,000 loss in its consolidated financial statements? So an exchange loss of $100,000 is expected to result in the consolidated accounts of Aperol company after consolidating the results of its foreign subsidiary. So foreign subsidiary they have, what will be the risk that they are facing over here? Very easy. Give me your answers very quickly. Yes, this is going to be translation risk. Why? I have studied what is the definition of translation risk. Whenever any company will have foreign currency assets or liabilities, which will be there if I have a foreign subsidiary, then I will face the translation related risk. So it has to be translation and not any other risk over here. All clear? All understood, guys? This is section A of our pre-March 2026 mock exam. Everybody is with me? Okay, great.